Okay, no problem. Just getting in some of your questions and overviews here. Okay, so we'll kick off, guys. Thanks everybody for joining this evening. Much appreciated you all coming on to look at today's workshop on a little bit on emotional regulation and an overview then to learning differences and how the two of those together. I suppose what we're trying to get at from today's short overview is kind of some everyday suggestions and content really that can help when things are kind of coming at us from left field and a little bit overwhelmed or kind of anxious tendencies. It's important to note that lots of students with learning challenges and difficulties may experience, mental health difficulties both at a low level or more at a severe level throughout their educational experience. And that's mainly because obviously the stress and the strain of going in at times to often an academic institution. But hopefully some of today's topics we'll be looking at will kind of clear up or hope help you all in the right direction. So for those that don't know me, I know a few are coming from different referrals, let's say from schools and bits and pieces. I'm Una Buckley, I'm the founder of Blossom for Life. And to date, we've worked with a number of organisations, but primarily we work on the basis of working with students in a one-to-one setting, either online or in person, helping with the day-to-day practicalities, not only of well-being, but also of study, exam tips, exam preparations, and just the overall kind of daily struggles and challenges. And if that's just phonics or awareness or maths or whatever kind of concrete things are coming up for them, that's generally the area we work on. We work on a number of other aspects too, in summers and bits and pieces and transition to secondary school programs, but generally we'd be working on that basis. To give you a little bit of an overview of obviously how to get in touch, if some of you don't know, hopefully most of you have an email address at this stage, but feel free obviously to get back onto us if you have any questions or any content you'd like to kind of go through. To give a brief overview, and I'll mention it a little bit throughout today's seminar, we have an online workshop on how to help dyslexics. It's available on our website, and that's going through some of the content today, but also some of the day-to-day practicalities, looking at homework, studying, how to kind of create that more study enhancing environment, both for younger age students and for students also sitting their exam modules. There's also some reference in here as well, how to get organised maybe for parent teacher meetings and how to get the most out of those meetings in terms of classroom and resource accommodations, etc. So there's a series of modules there that are easy accessible, available on the website if anybody has any questions or content they'd like further answers on after today's seminar. So to dive straight in, and I suppose we'll kind of run through these at a brief level. It's important to note this is not a neurological seminar or anything like that, or we'll be here for quite a lot longer. This is just giving you a brief overview and a brief snippet into some of the content that is applicable for us. I will also, if people are interested, send these out afterwards. There's a YouTube clip here. It's quite useful. It's also quite short, but I also have bits of the points and reference on the further slide. But if anybody would like to watch the video afterwards, please do let me know. So I suppose going back to the basics really and to how we're kind of biologically functioned and how that affects us from an emotional regulation standpoint, we have many different parts of us, okay? And obviously our brain is very much ingrained in our emotional and regulatory system. These are the main aspects here, both into primitive feeling and thinking, and all in different cortexes. And I suppose when we're handling either a child or a teenager or even an adult, and in any day context, regardless of from a learning difference context, there is often a wide range of emotions that we're all experiencing at the same time or at different periods throughout the day. And they stem from different parts of our brain and are linked to different systems that make up our body. Our amygdala, and lots of people may notice and know of a little bit more through the heightened awareness of the pandemic and different bits and pieces. It's mainly responsible for our fight, flight, and freeze response, which is where an awful lot of people's anxieties and worries and fears come from. And amygdala is usually sparked into a little bit of overdrive around exam season, around changes, around doing difficult pieces of homework, doing tests environment. And it really is about us trying to learn how to regulate those aspects. But it's important to know also where it comes from. It is an innate part of everybody. Some people have more of a heightened and maybe overactive part, and other people less so. And that's just very much linked to a whole combination of genetics and, use and etc. etc. But it's very important to know that we all have this, but it's to the level that we extend its use to. And it can have a practical application, of course, if we need to, move out of the way, if a car is coming to hit us, that's really important. But also it can be overused and kind of disproportionate to the reality as well. The thinking side. So this is our newest level, but also our most advanced level. Okay. And this is the rational, but the higher level thinking and the language and the imagination and the ideas. So this might be a really prime area for someone with a learning difference that, is using a lot of their imaginative and their creative brain and coming up with ideas and drawing and art and drama, and all their expression aspect may live here. And this part is where we want to hone in on a little bit more, because when we utilize that area a little bit more, we create more regulation then for further aspects such as our amygdala. And then our limbic system. So our limbic system very much intertwined here also with our amygdala, but this is our feelings part. So our emotions, our feelings, our habits, our memories, which is really, really vital. It's a really small section, but has a very detailed job, and our interaction with others. And all of those areas affect how we feel. So you can imagine when we're interacting with others, in a supermarket, or they're on the road and they're cutting over, or in a nice and environmental context, we're getting different responses in our body. We're feeling good about certain things, we're feeling not so good about other things, and we're reacting and responding daily to so many what we call stimulus. And stimulus is the phone, is the cars, is the noise, is the total environment that we are alert to from the minute that we wake up to the minute we go to bed. No wonder why most people are so tired. And what we want to do is try and regulate out some stimulus, notice what stimulus are more triggering for certain children or for certain students, and then how we can incorporate those, because we don't want to avoid those stimuluses, because they'll be generally surrounded by us on a regular basis, very much so. So it's really about trying to incorporate them and creating a more well-being response to the triggers that are there. And then our instinctive part of our brain. So our basic bodily functions, so very much interacting with our breathing, our blood circulation, and all our different aspects that work on a daily basis to keep us moving and keep us alive. And these are also our unconscious habits. So if a student develops an unconscious habit of coming in and they're changing the clothes and then they're doing their homework, or they're coming in and they're creating their own habit, lots of these things may be unconscious and what we call habitual. That happen over time, they're reoccurring. And this may also be reoccurring in terms of stresses. So a student has to sit an exam, they develop the stress response, and then they figure out, okay, I kind of always now stressing with exam environments, regardless if it's a big exam, a small exam, exam you've prepared for, exam you haven't prepared for. We've overactive and we've created what we call an association between the two of those things. We have exam and then we've stress, and we link them both together. And what happens is we want to then kind of rewire and rechange that pattern so that we don't always associate certain events to certain feelings and emotions. Because there may be some exams that may be prepared for, they may be easier, they may, go really well, and therefore we want to relearn that not everything needs to be a stressor. Some people might have this as well with, flying or traveling, or, going to different places or doing different things. Lots of people will have innate stressors or heights or lots of different things that are built into us, but it's about then trying to see how can we practically replace those with more learned behaviors and patterns. Also, a really interesting one for us to look at, and I'll actually throw this one up. It's by Dr. Dan Siegel, and I'm not sure if some of you have come across him previously, but he's very much on the link between our brain and our emotion, let's say regulation, but also cognition. Okay, and he developed a very easy to understand concept even for younger students, but for all ages, and how to practically apply things. So I'm just going to briefly pull this up for us. Um, and what I'll do is I'll reshare this on the other screen so that we can just have a quick look into it. And again, it's there after the seminar or after the session if anybody wants to relook at it themselves. Hopefully everybody should see it now.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up, representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull, the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child. And that's important to explain to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
Great. So I suppose as Daniel there is working on, and as he mentioned towards the end, his other famous model is Name It to Tame It, which has become more widely renowned and used in lots of therapeutic practices, really overall. But I suppose it really is about trying to understand where these aspects and habits come from first, before we can then, let's say, start putting practical solutions and rational, resolve aspects in place. Because as we know, we can't really often resolve things if we don't know where they've come from or where their resolution is. And the hand model, as he mentioned, he's kind of come up with that as a way of explaining to it. As he stated, even for younger students, it can be great because emotions and body systems and brain and all those things can be quite complicated aspects for all of us. But for younger students, for them to understand a little bit of how this works at a very young age will really maybe help them moving forward as they get to the teenage years, and there's a lot of different more hormones and emotions involved. Understanding a little bit of this quite early can really help them on the best path and hopefully help the dynamic not only at home but also in school. So brain emotions and our ability then to engage in learning. And I suppose this really is where we want to kind of hone in on. So if we don't get a good night's sleep, Okay, if we don't have the right food, if we haven't eaten, if we're, stressed or strained about something, we're generally not going to perform to the best of our abilities. Okay, and that could be if we're doing a match or we're, performing a piece or playing a piece of music or whichever it is. And the same really applies to a learning context, right? So when students have to go to school for 5 days a week, pretty much is most of the Irish system at the moment. Still, that may change in the future, but at the moment it's still Monday to Friday, from 9 to 3 or 4, depending upon, give or take, different timelines. It's quite a large piece of the day. And it is unrealistic to say that between kind of Sunday night and Friday afternoon, that nothing's going to interfere with the students' well-being, there's nothing's going to interfere with their life, there's nothing going to be of triggers. That's not the reality of the world that we live in. So as they move through the week, different things might pop up. Things might pop up on the Saturday and the Sunday that carry over into the Monday and Tuesday, or things may happen on the Monday and Tuesday that will carry into the rest of the week. And when we're in a learning environment where we're constantly given things to absorb, retain, but then also reproduce. So going through, let's say, maths examples, and then you now need to do them at home to reproduce them, giving different topics and questions in secondary school, and you need to now study them to prepare for a different test. So we're trying to absorb, retain, but then also remember, let's say, and store that both in your short and long term memory. And that really is affected massively by how we're feeling in that particular moment. If we're stressed, if we're strained, if we're looking at the window, if we're doing all these things, our chances of absorbing and retaining the information is drastically going down, and it's getting lower and lower and lower. And it is outlined that obviously if we're in fight or flight, or our brains are disconnected, or we're in kind of different states of alertness, we're not going to be able to recall lots of that information for when we need it. So it really is about educating the individual so that they know, okay, like as Dan Siegel was saying, when they need to take a break, when they can engage, when they're ready and primed for learning. Because if we're in an environment where we're not really able to learn at the moment, then it isn't really the most effective use of your time. And actually, it's affecting then your reboot level. So if we're in an environment that we're already stressed and strained in, we're not really absorbing it, but it's taking us then longer to what I call reboot and to go again because we need more time then to rest and recover. So, emotion regulation, feelings, and behaviors. And there's a lot of, I suppose, theories around different ways of emotional regulation and different tools that can be practically applied both at home and in a school-based context, and with different level of emotions or things that are unexpected or things that are kind of come from left field. What we would find for most of the students that we work with is change is often a really big challenge. Okay, so that's either planned change or unplanned change. That could be either a change with moves or with school moves or house moves, which would be considered bigger changes, or that could be day-to-day changes. They were supposed to do an activity today and that's now cancelled or changed, or they're going to a friend's house and now that's changed or that's cancelled. So when those things pop up, it really is about what's in the tool belt, not only from a parent or a teacher standpoint, but also from the child to help manage those different changes and move through them. And I suppose as we move through different stages from childhood to teenage years and adulthood, we become more experienced with different emotions, but we also, as we mentioned earlier, may develop then unhealthy habits and behaviors. Some people may, as we know, mask their emotions. They may pretend that they don't have those emotions. They may be all smiley and they're not that inside. So it really is about trying to figure out first where maybe somebody lands with their day-to-day emotions and how that can be worked on and how that can be moved through. So if we look at the green box first, when we're emotionally regulated, we can be more balanced, manage stress, listen to others, aware of their needs, express our own needs, act appropriately, stay calm, don't take things personally, and protect important connections and relationships. And all of those are very important, but definitely point three is really important when somebody is in a context really on a daily basis where there could be 20 or 30 other students and kids and teenagers or adults with all of their ranges of emotions. And what happens is students maybe act out or they behave differently and they're impacting other people's emotional systems because they may not also be aware of their impact on others. And people often see that as maybe there's different tendencies towards that, but it's also going back to the basis of, well, if that child or student isn't already, feeling capable to handle everything that's thrown at them, they can't really absorb and take into fact everybody else's emotions and systems and what's going on for them because that's just too much. We still are all ingrained to still need to look after ourselves. Yes, it's very important that we integrate and work as a unit, but also there is an innate aspect of all of us as human beings that we need to manage ourselves first. So in a classroom context, this would be very common, particularly in the younger years of students kind of doing their own thing and, doing their own toys and their own games. And yes, integrating and doing things more with others, but they may also be into their own bubble, let's say, in their own cortex that this happened to them and she took my toy and those things that are more prevalent, let's say, at that particular stage and at that junction. So, why we're not emotionally regulated then? So, we're often off kilter. We feel that things are out of our control. We feel stressed, maybe by life stressors or academic stressors, unable to listen or to think. So, that kind of maybe brain fog or that clarity perspective on things, express our needs in a destructive way, act inappropriately, lose our cool. So, as Dan Siegel was referring to, we may overreact or even just react to certain situations a little bit too prematurely, and our reaction may not suit the situation that is presented to us. Take things personally, and then, as we said, damage relationships or connections. Also, on this side, the take things personally could be a big one as well for lots of people, particularly for students where there's lots of comparison and compare, not only academically, but socially, and blending in and fitting in is a particular aspect that is still important, but it's also very heightened at that particular age group. And, if they don't kind of feel like they're integrating in or they're being invited or included in things or games or out in the yard, they may take those things personally and it may then show up in other areas. So it may not even be a conscious knowing that it's affecting them. It's something that maybe is unconscious, or it's also something that maybe is hidden as well to avoid the exposure of the issue. So what I'll do is I'm just going to stop the share of the slides for a second.